Module 2 of the course includes the subject of torts, and this video is intended to provide a little bit more information about torts. The subject of torts is not really something that a lot of people think a lot about, if they think about it at all, but most court cases that aren't criminal in nature involve torts. Torts are private wrongs, which means that they are acts that are committed by private individuals or organizations that cause damage or injury to other individual people or organizations. If one person commits a tort or commits an act that causes injury or damage to another person, then the person suffering the injury or damage is entitled to recover damages, usually in the form of money, from the person who caused the act. There are two broad categories of torts: intentional torts and unintentional torts. The intention that's involved in determining if a tort is an intentional tort or an unintentional tort is the intention to commit the act, not the intention to harm somebody or cause damage or injury. And so an intentional tort is a tort that's based on an act that was intentionally done. Intentional torts can also be crimes sometimes. For example, assault, which is placing someone in fear of being hit, and battery, which is the actual hitting of someone, can both be torts and crimes. The difference is that if a crime is committed, or if a crime is alleged to have been committed, then that act is addressed in a criminal proceeding, and the outcome of that criminal proceeding is that if the person who is alleged to have committed a crime is convicted of committing that crime, then they are either imprisoned or they have to pay a fine, or both. If the act that's being complained of is a tort, if it's a private wrong, then that's handled in a civil proceeding, and if the person who is alleged to have committed the act that caused the damages is found to have done that, then they can be ordered by the court to pay the individual who was injured or damaged damages in the form of money. Other examples of intentional torts are trespass, which means going on someone's property without their permission, defamation, which means saying or writing something about someone who is that is not true, or the intentional infliction of emotional damages. Trespass can be a crime. Defamation and the intentional infliction of emotional damages are not crimes. The other category of torts is unintentional torts, or what's usually called negligence, which occurs when someone commits an act that breaches a duty they have, and that damages or injury arise out of that breach of a duty. There are four elements that have to be shown for there to be negligence. First, there has to be a duty that the defendant, the person who committed the act, owes to the plaintiff, the person who was injured or is alleged to have been injured by the act. Second, there has to be a breach of that duty. Third, there has to be an injury to the plaintiff. And fourth, there has to be causation. The breach of duty has to be the actual and proximate cause of the injury to the plaintiff. Duties can arise from a variety of sources. They can arise from law. For instance, there's a law that says I have to stop at red lights. That imposes a duty on me to stop at red lights. If I don't stop at a red light and I run into somebody, then I have violated the law, and there are criminal penalties that can be attached to that. but I've also breached my duty to stop at the red light. And if I don't stop at a red light and run into someone, then I have a duty to them that I've breached. A duty can also arise out of a specific relationship. For instance, if I'm a surgeon and I'm operating on someone and I make a mistake and I injure them, then I have breached my duty to them not to injure them. Duties can also arise out of situations that we face. Everyone is expected to and does have a duty to act reasonably in the situations that they find themselves in. So for instance, if I'm cutting down a tree that's on the property line between your property and my property, and I miscalculate where that tree will fall, and it falls on your house, I've breached a duty to act reasonably in doing what I'm doing. And that breach of duty is an element of negligence. Second element of negligence is the breach of the duty, and that's pretty easy to determine. If it's determined that I have a duty and I've done something that resulted in injury, then more than likely I have breached my duty that I owed to the plaintiff. The third element of negligence is injury to the plaintiff, and that's usually apparent. The fourth element of negligence is often the most difficult to deal with because there are actually two parts to this fourth element, which is causation. The two parts are that the breach of duty has to be the actual cause of the plaintiff's injury, and it also has to be the proximate cause of the plaintiff's injury. Actual causation is usually approached with what's called the but-for test. The but-for test. But for the act committed by the defendant, the plaintiff wouldn't have been injured. That is, the very fact that the defendant did the act, breached the duty, is the reason that the plaintiff was injured. If that's the case, then there's actual cause. The other part of the test is the proximate cause test, and proximate cause is a little bit more difficult, but what proximate cause involves is foreseeability. That is, when the defendant breached the duty, were the injuries or damages that were actually caused foreseeable, reasonably foreseeable? If they were, then there's proximate cause. The defendant's breach of duty was the actual and proximate cause of the plaintiff's injury. If for some reason the injuries or damages that occurred were not reasonably foreseeable, if they were of a nature or of some circumstance that you couldn't reasonably have foreseen that they would have occurred, then there's no proximate cause. Typically, proximate cause is a problem because the defendant doesn't act, which breaches a duty, but there is some lapse in time between the duty being breached and the injury or damage occurring, or there is a series of occurrences that lead to the damage or injury to the plaintiff that makes it unreasonable for the defendant to have foreseen that the damage would have occurred. There are a number of examples of that. So somebody does something that's a breach of duty, but that causes something else to happen, and that causes something else to happen, and that causes something else to happen, so that the injury to the plaintiff occurs after a series of events that aren't the fault of the defendant. Then there's not going to be proximate cause. And if there's not proximate cause, then the element of causation that's necessary to prove negligence hasn't been proved. So remember that there are those four elements of negligence. The existence of a duty, which can arise from various things, the breach of that duty, which is usually pretty apparent, an injury to the plaintiff, which is also usually pretty apparent, and the requirement that the breach of duty by the defendant be the actual and the proximate cause of the injury or damage that the plaintiff has suffered.